Okay, cool. So, today we're talking about, well, from Whiteboard to Blackboard. First, who am I? 'Cause that's apparently required. Stella, second year. Bring of Hell for ISTS. Allegedly junior ops lead. Networking. Hire me. And a bit of an engineering fanatic. The rest of this doesn't really matter. The engineering part does. So we're talking about planes today. Very special planes. Hello? But first, some quick credit. I just realized one. Hey, there we go. Credit to Nicholas Means. Taking a lot of inspiration from his presentation he gave at Lead Developer or Lead Dev 2017. If you've seen that, you'll notice that pretty quickly. But also will say this is rushed even by my standards. Been busy. But got it out. So let's talk about Skunkworks, which is probably a name you've heard before, but I'll take a good bet that you don't actually know what it means. Make it bigger. There we go. I said, oh God, it's going to do this to me again. Now it works. Okay, cool. That's going to be fun. Skunkworks. It's the experimental aircraft division of Lockheed Martin. It was not originally named that, as it turns out. It originated in the 1940s. It was actually originally didn't have much of a name at all. It was just the way that they built the first American jet aircraft. Because the Germans made one, and it was faster than anything we had. And so the Brits basically said, in 180 days, we will give you a jet engine. It is this size. Please go make a plane to put it in. So then we can, bomb the Germans. Or not get bombed with them, I guess. Because of the Blitz. That was not as interesting of a story. I mean, it was interesting that, in 180 days, they had a turnaround where they took a brand new engine type and built a plane, I think partially from scratch, or not mostly from scratch. And that's the pattern of Skunkworks. They did something brand new in a fraction of time it's supposed to take, because there's always insane deadlines. If it wasn't insane deadlines, it wouldn't be Skunkworks. It wouldn't be government, quite frankly. But moving forward to the 1950s or late 1940s, God, I hate this stuff sometimes. Computers. After World War II and the Yalta Conference, a lot of people they hear, were close allies for a while. America and Soviet Union. They've been working together, but just like just like a relationship when you go from being together to being long distance, they started drifting apart. They weren't exactly They weren't so friendly anymore, because now their enemy was not the same enemy. The enemy of the enemy was no longer their friend, and so this government showed some differences of opinion, you could say, about a couple small things like how the world should be run, and the economy and all of government and society, things that don't really matter, but. Once they stop sharing information freely about what they're doing, or at least semi-freely as it was in World War II, there's a clear path forward. Any of you guys would take two. Espionage. The first target, the main target, was Kapuzin Yar. It's founded in 1946, or not founded, but it was created in 1946. It's the Soviet Union's equivalent of Area 51. They have, experimental aircraft, experimental whatever else, aliens probably, I don't know. They have all of Siberia for that too. But also it's heavily fortified, They don't like people looking at their planes. They're like military equipment. And so they have radars. They have radar in the CIA intel was saying that you could see about 65,000 feet above it, roughly. And so, and the U.S. had nothing that could go that high. So they eventually got one plane over it. They took like some bomber. They took everything out of it. Got to go about and so they got to go about 70. They got it just over it, and they came back a ton of bullet holes in it. So the CIA came out and they asked for a plane going 70,000 feet, and they needed it fast as you can get a plane going 70,000 feet in the 1950s. And with that, you look at the F-104 Starfighter. Now, this is the fastest US plane at the time. It could do Mach 2 in a dash, twice the speed of sound, for short periods of time, which is not what they asked for. No one cares about Mach numbers when you're trying to be a spy plane, quite frankly. It needed a lot of work to get into what they wanted. And so some cuts had to be made. The first thing was a custom fuel for, whatever they did. And none of a cut were particularly important, right? Custom fuel, that makes sense. You're building a new thing, you need new fuel. But you get it so high up, it would evaporate. If you know how things evaporate, if you know about pressures, you know that. If not, just trust me, things evaporate at lower pressure at high altitude. Next up, things that got cut. Landing gear, not important. Because I know that's quite heavy. And at some point during this project, they figured out that every pound of weight that they saved was roughly equivalent to 1 foot of altitude. So they were cutting weight as much as they could. You don't need huge landing gear if you're a light plane, and you don't need it in general if you're using a small number of skilled pilots, which is generally the thing you're looking for. Next up, and stuff about safety. Again, unimportant. They made one of the big things they did was they made the coffin corner, as it was called. This plane, which we'll get to in a second, had a 10-mile-per-hour window between the stall speed, which is not engine stall, it's when you stop producing lift and fall to the sky like a rock. 10-mile-per-hour difference between that and your maximum speed. So you were basically always within 5 miles per hour of death, which is not death, but if you stall over hostile airspace, people are going to be mad at you, and you'll get detected. It also was a barely pressurized cockpit. I don't know exactly if it was not pressurized at all or barely pressurized, but you have to wear a bulky pressure suit so that you didn't die or pass out and then die from passing out on an airplane. And you had to breathe for about an hour. Pilots had to breathe pure oxygen before getting in. Basically, more or less, I think, just to oxygenate their blood. It was not a fun thing to fly in, although it was very fun to fly. Apparently, you can't really get in them and fly them all willy-nilly. And the airframe, the actual body itself, was not designed for combat. Because it turns out, if this thing ever saw another plane at it, it was dead. There's no point in building a thing that could take a punch or do high G maneuvers or anything like that. It's supposed to be going nice and slow, just really stupidly high up. And it more or less did that. And the airframe was so light that when someone was working on it, when it's being made, someone bumped into it with a toolbox, right? Happens. Unlike, instead of just leaving a gash like you'd see on most, it actually left a multiple inch indentation into the frame because it was that thin. It was, I think, closer to tinfoil than you would expect from a thing that would fly. This plane, which you might recognize, is the U-2. In service for a very long time for espionage. It's pretty well known. It was finished in 8 months. They went from the Starfighter to that, so a Mach 2 plane to something that go 74,500 feet in 8 months. And basically, once this thing was being flown, every single day pilots were breaking altitude records. The wings are the biggest difference. If we compare these two here, sometimes I hate computers. Oops. There we go. Look at both these two. If you look at the wings of the U-2, they're obviously much larger, like a glider. And that's basically what it is. It's a powered glider that's military. Basically, glider body. It's extremely good at its job. But it also is so light. Those two planes are the same weight. Despite the fact that the U-2 has I think over double the wing area, which is kind of absurd when you think about it, right? And it has a guy and a camera, and that's all it is. Oh, and because the wings are so flexible, if you get turbulence, it'll flop like a bird. And then when you land, they have to have titanium skids on the end of the wings because they would drag across the ground. However, there's a bit of a problem. Almost immediately, there were Soviet MiGs, which were their fighter jets, started blocking the view. First, there was one hovering underneath, then there was a squadron of MiGs, which is, not ideal. At this point, they didn't. There was nothing they couldn't hit the U-2. They would fire missiles at it just for kicks, but it wouldn't get to the U-2 because they was so much higher than they were, like 15,000 feet higher than the MiGs were. But it was pretty clear that this was not going to last very long. CIS estimated 18 to 24 months of mission viability. And so they put out bids for a new plane that could be made in 22 months. So the new plane has a couple of new requirements. It had to go to 90,000 feet, and it had to go to Mach 2. And this shows the priorities of the CIA at this point. They don't care about like 90. They care about very few things, and nothing else matters. Cost, not important. Range matters too a bit. They, I think, have 1,500-mile range, if I recall, but also, runway length, not a factor. Like pilot comfort, who cares? Hard to fly, teach better pilots. It's not important to them. And so, some other problems with this speed is at Mach 2, aluminum melts. There are no engines at this point that exist to go to Mach 2. Aerodynamics at like supersonic speeds are pretty weird, and that wasn't fully understood. It was more understood than it used to be, but it was still like hard. There's some material science about that because it's going so fast, because of the aluminum melting. They had to use titanium. It was one of the first planes to ever be made with titanium, which is not easy. And because it gets so hot from going so fast, you have to make sure the fuel didn't explode when you're in the air, which is obviously not great. So you might be thinking, you see this? No. When you see this, oh, that's the SR-71 Blackbird. You're wrong. It's not. That's Lockheed A-12. That's what was built for the CIA, because this went Mach 3.25 officially, though there's records of it going above Mach 3.5, which is absurd. It went 85,000 feet, so not quite 90,000, but pretty close. It was faster than missiles. It was faster than anything else that could touch it. It was more than you could really ever expect. It was untouchable for a while. It was also baby stealth. They took some consideration of stealth at this point. Flat surfaces are better than big curved surfaces for reflecting radar, or for not reflecting radar. It's also well known for leaking fuel out, and that's because it got so hot as it was being flown that no sealants could survive that. So as things would expand and contract and get super fucking hot. So alas, they have. It would drip a small amount of fuel, and they had a permissible amount of fuel it could drip on the runway before it got up. And it got just enough fuel to get up. So also the engines. I'm not going to go into how jet engines work, because holy crap. But you'll notice the big cones in the front. It's a mix of what's called a ramjet and a turbojet. Ramjet, as you expect, you ram air into it, and that helps make power. And a turbojet means turbo, turbine. Not the same. It's closer to what you'd see on most like fighter jets and stuff. What you see on an airplane record is usually a turbofan engine, so no jet, just for context. The thing with a ramjet is you can't get off the ground with it because you need air moving through it, and obviously when you're on the ground, there's no air moving through it. So in order to get to super long speed, you need either a second engine, or in this case, those nose cones, you see that thing move forwards and backwards. I think like 18 inches or so, if I recall correctly. They move back for a lot to basically aim the shock wave at supersonic speeds into the engine, into like point in the engine. Also, titanium sucks to work with. It's like a pain. It catches on fire when you mill it. You need special drill bits. It's expensive as hell. You had to buy it they bought it from Russia. They probably could have bought it from Australia. But also, yeah, buying your the materials for your plane from Russia was interesting. But they did it, and they met all the requirements they needed very well. Still though, not the SR-71 Blackbird on a technicality, because the SR-71 Blackbird was this plane. We took it as 2 windows because it was the one for the Air Force once they took it over. It's basically the same plane. It's two-seater because this Air Force wanted a dedicated person on the cameras. Basically, otherwise same specifications, same speed, same altitudes, more or less. And still the fastest to this day. There's no faster planes been made because there really is no need to. But speaking of stealth, let's talk about some big boy stealth. This was right after the Vietnam War. There's a paper that came out from Russia, or Soviet Union, I guess at the time. And this caught an eye of one of the engineers at Skunk Works. They started making a model. It was a paper on how to calculate the radar, like diffraction patterns. Like again, after anyone, they could calculate the reflection, but diffraction basically means that, oversimplifying, radar can go, electromagnetic radiation in general can travel along the edge of a material, which makes no sense. And it's really hard to predict if you don't understand it. So at some point, a paper got out of Russia, officially, because Russians didn't really know what they had, that described how to calculate this. So they picked the priorities right at the bat, pure stealth. That's all it needs to be, stealth. It needs to be invisible on radar. And that is more or less what they got. They picked the priorities of it. They picked it being a bomber. It was mostly after the 1973 Yom Kippur War in Israel. And that's just because during that, within like 2 or 3 weeks, like over 100 American-made fighter jets got shot out of the sky just because the Russians had really good radar all of a sudden. And so we need a bomber to bomb the fuck out of the anti-aircraft facilities. And at last, we have the Have Blue prototype. 2 of these ever existed, both of them crashed. Just a prototype though. It was subsonic, even though it looks like it should go real fast. It went really slow, for one, because a sonic boom is loud. People would hear it. So that's not very good stealth. It was unstable and, also it's all flat, because that's all they could calculate. They could not compute a more complicated shape for the radar diffraction patterns. It was unstable on all 3 flight axes, so up and down pitch, roll, and I believe yaw too. Not a pilot and will never be because the FAA. So they had a computer from the F-16 that they had made a little while earlier, which the F-16 was unstable in pitch. Just means that if, depending on what you're doing, you can get situations when it will kind of run away from you. Does that make sense? And so, because it's unstable in all 3 directions, they had the computer, basically fly-by-wire system, move and do the calculations to stay level in all 3 directions. They would sum that with the inputs from the pilot, and then you get this. It was also going to be defenseless. If this saw another plane, it was dead. If it got a missile thrown at it, it was dead. There was, like, that guy there, if anyone who didn't like it saw it, it was gone. It couldn't go that high, it couldn't go that fast. And, it doesn't really look like a plane, because it basically isn't. They started with a diamond, like a 3D shape of a diamond, sort of, and they carved it out into a plane until it was invisible on radar. It had the same radar observability as a 1/8 inch metal BB, or metal bearing, sorry. It was like absurdly difficult to see. And it only carried 2 bombs. All this thing, only 2 bombs. But that eventually got you into the F-117 Nighthawk, which is what actually was deployed. And they deployed many of them. And if anything, saved the government a lot of money and soldiers for stuff like in Libya, when they were flying over, and it was so good at being stealthy, it could fly over certain anti-aircraft installations and drop bombs on them directly. They knocked out most of Libya's anti-aircraft systems with this plane, which is kind of absurd, because it just dropping, like, it drops 2 missiles. It could, and flight controls are slightly changed just for safety reasons, because when you reuse flight controls for multiple things, you lose authority. Basically, you can do less if they're doing 2 jobs. And so, alas, this. Now, to be fair, I talk a lot about planes. And last time I checked, that's not the plane club. I mean, it just is now. I'm making a petition. But it's not. The whole point of this all is that, not to sound like a motivational speaker, because I think those people are generally annoying, but you're probably more capable than you think. All the things that were mentioned here, all the different projects, they were things that nobody had done before, not a single person. And they brought them to life in pretty short timelines. These people went to school, they didn't, some of them studied aeronautics or radar, but no one studied all of them, and many of them were working on bleeding edge information. They had extremely short timelines. They were doing things they were never trained to do. Does that sound at all familiar? That's kind of our jobs a lot of the time, in any engineering field, for that matter. Like, you're doing something that's, if you're doing anything vaguely interesting, in my opinion anyway, you're doing something that's sort of novel, and that's, and usually time matters, at least to some extent, and they focus on things that matter. The U-2, it had 2 landing gear. I forgot to mention it, it has bicycle landing gear. So it has 2 wheels in line, and that was all of its landing gear until it got to the ground, when they would basically put a wheel underneath the wing that would fall off when it took off again, by design. It was insanely, you know, it had a 10-mile-per-hour window when it could fly safely. It was, you know, it couldn't go very fast, but it did what the client wanted. It did its job. The same thing with the U-2. I just said U-2. Same thing as on Blackboard. It dripped fuel on the runway. It was expensive as all hell to run. It couldn't take off without being immediately refueled because it was so unaerodynamic. It would it could not take off with a full tank of fuel. It just wouldn't be able to hold enough. But it doesn't matter, because that's not what they wanted. They got what they needed done. And all of this is breaking down to use what you know. But in most tasks, you probably know at least something involving most of the things involved. And the point of engineering is to bring those together, ways to bridge them together and make something that's actually, you know, useful. Do what you actually want to do. The thing that some of this in our realm is kind of fuck around and find out, because you can do that. That's kind of what they do too with the running, nowadays run simulations. Back then, all their stuff was super lenient. It's try it and see what happens, essentially. Not necessarily in production, but in some situation, figuring it out. It's more powerful than I think most people expect, and it gets you really far. If it can get Lockheed and less than 100 people in a couple of months to building entirely new groundbreaking, record-breaking airplanes and such, it will probably work for whatever you're doing too. Any questions? If you guys didn't know, thank you.